Welcome to Weeds That Feed, where we celebrate and advocate for native and wild plants, and especially their contribution to nature. Now, today I'm going to talk about the snowdrop. Now, snowdrop isn't a native plant, it's a wild plant, if you like. It's naturalised, it's been here since cultivation in the UK since 1500s and in the wild since 1700s. It starts flowering in January. This has been out for a week or maybe a bit more. It will go on through the next couple of months to creep right into the garden along all these borders on the other side of the hedge. It isn't massively showy. It's a beautiful little flower. Pops this little head up as celebration of a coming spring. The snowdrop does have an interesting trait that it will open its petals out to make nectar available at about 10 degrees Celsius, which is also about the temperature that pollinating insects will start flying. It sits in the landscape quite well, I think. It does look like a native plant, even if it's not, and actually fills a gap in the sort of early nectar for those early pollinators. In fact, it only supports 2 insects, recorded insects, so no phytophagous insects, which are the insects that eat the plant, but it does support the honeybee and the buff-tailed bumblebee. Now, I want to go on and talk just a little bit about those bees before we get back to the snowdrop. We've got somewhere in the region of 270 bee species in the UK. That's made up of about 245 solitary bees and 25 bumblebees. And then there's one other bee, which has an amazing PR agent, and that is the honeybee. Now, we're pretty keen on the honeybee, I imagine, because we can extract the honey. The honeybee already gets a lot of human help. Now, it is important for pollinating, don't get me wrong, but I'm pretty interested in all that other bunch of bees that don't get any human help. And this little guy behind us, the snowdrop, Galanthus nivalis, is a help to one bee in particular, which is the buff-tailed bumblebee. Now, these new queens come out earlier than pretty much any other bumblebee. All of the species of bee hibernate or go into diapause, apart from buff-tailed bumblebees occasionally in warmer climes, sort of down south in some urban areas, that sort of thing. Now, they can those colonies can remain active all year, and the buff-tailed bumblebee, new queens and workers actually can be out in even December and January. So the snowdrop's really helping out there. There are other plants as well, actual native plants such as gorse and hazel for its pollen, winter aconite, stinking hellebore, to mention a few, but there are only really a few sort of true natives out with nectar or pollen in January. When we get into February, there's more. Primrose will be out fairly soon, and you've got alder and willow coming on as well. But the snowdrop's filling a little gap at the moment, which is a really useful plant for something that is now very much part of our wild plant community. And my neighbour just passed, actually, who's lovely Susie, who's 85, and she tells me that she planted these snowdrops about 30 years ago in this bank outside of my house, and how much they've spread. Another neighbour just passed, and we were talking about the snowdrops, and she calls them brave little soldiers, and which I thought was very amusing, but they are very sweet to see at this time of year. So perhaps snowdrops ought to be thought of as something that fills an ecological niche. Maybe a good example of where a non-native plant is benefiting and supporting the native community of plants. Perhaps we ought to think of this plant as an ecological companion rather than a cornerstone. So the snowdrop is a welcome partner to our native plants, I think. It doesn't seem to be out competing anything, and it's fulfilling a little bit of a gap in the pollinators for a couple of, certainly one very needy pollinator at that time of year. So snowdrops are part of the story, and they're supporting our native plants, and that's great, and helping out in a little part of the year where it's really lean. But those other native plants that I mentioned earlier, especially the ones that sort of maybe the shrubby ones, like the gorse and hazel, for instance. Gorse is a great example. I spoke about that in more detail a few weeks ago, but that's got flowers on now. It's got structure. It feeds larval and other plant-eating phytophagous species. It supports many of those and many other pollinators for a long period of time, creates structure for hibernating insects and nesting birds, etc., 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 etc. So snowdrop is beautiful, it is welcome, but do plant other native plants that are going to be great at this time of year. So that's it for this week's Weed That Feeds, and don't forget to choose plants that wildlife choose, and I'll see you again next week.